Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Rafael P. Roman. What will President Trump do next? That's the big question after a group of House and Senate negotiators reached a deal in principle to avoid another government shutdown ahead of Friday's deadline. The tentative agreement reportedly includes nearly $1.4 billion for fencing and other physical barriers at the southern border. That's far less than what President Trump has demanded for his border wall and raises the question of how he will respond. One option? He could sign off on the deal and still declare a national emergency to secure the kind of money he's really looking for. For more on that possibility, Jack Ford recently caught up with Andrew Boyle, counsel in the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. Jack began the conversation by asking what is it that gives President Trump the authority to declare a national emergency.
Before the National Emergencies Act came into effect, it was kind of a free-for-all. The president had over 400 emergency powers that he could access simply on his say-so of declaration of national emergency, and he didn't have to say which powers he was actually using. So in 1976, this is the post-Watergate era, the Congress got concerned about this process, and they said, we want to put more restrictions on the president's ability to declare national emergencies. We want to institute some process. We want Congress to have a role in this. And they set up a process whereby certain procedural requirements had to be met in order to declare a national emergency and use those powers. Unfortunately, we're realizing now that they may not have gotten quite far enough.
So if the president says, all right, I believe there's a national emergency, I want to declare it, and I want to do some things, what are the standards that have to be followed, and what sort of oversight does Congress have on that?
So he has to formally transmit to Congress that he's declaring a national emergency. He has to place a notice in the Federal Register. He also has to identify which of the powers he's going to use under the Declaration of National Emergency. He has access to 136 powers when he declares a national emergency, but he has to say which particular statutes he's going to use. Congress initially, under the National Emergencies Act, had a process in place whereby a simple majority of both of the houses, they could terminate a national emergency. That process was found unconstitutional, not specifically in relation to the National Emergencies Act, but generally in a 1983 case. And so now we're in a process whereby if Congress wants to terminate a national emergency, they have to pass a veto-proof majority, a joint resolution to terminate that national emergency.
Do the courts have any role here? In other words, if somebody wanted to challenge this, could they get into the courts somehow and say, no, the basic fundamental thesis here doesn't exist. There is not an emergency. Therefore, the argument would be you cannot utilize any of these other powers, moving money around, if you would, to affect this wall. Could that happen?
That absolutely could happen. The first question would be who has standing, who is injured by this decision to declare a national emergency and to try to build the wall. Possibilities include Congress itself, although that is a difficult area. It's difficult for Congress to establish standing for itself. More likely possibilities include landowners along where the border wall would be built, potentially environmental groups that would be injured by this law. And they would certainly challenge the claim that this is a true national emergency. Under the National Emergencies Act, there isn't a lot of definition about what constitutes a true national emergency, but there would be the possibility to sort of look at what the plain meaning of those terms are. And then also litigation around the particular statutory laws that he tries to use to move money around and whether he has satisfied those particular provisions. Now, we've seen in other contexts that courts are often very deferential to the executive when he is talking about national defense or national security. And it's anyone's guess how deferential they would be, particularly in a situation like this one, where the president has been telegraphing for some time now that he sort of sees this as a possible end run around Congress and not a true national emergency at all.
If indeed the president were to choose to do this, and again, we don't know if he will or not, I have seen some Republicans quoted as saying, look, putting aside the notion of whether we need a wall or not, this is bad policy because what you're doing is creating a precedent that says if you're not able to resolve policy issues, the president is going to take it into his or her own hands. And the comments I've said is that now is destroying the notion of the balance of power and checks and balances. Might you anticipate that type of argument garnering some traction amongst especially Republicans in Congress?
Absolutely. Many congresspersons in Congress from both sides of the aisle have apparently told the president directly that this would be a horrible idea, a bad way to make policy, and I would venture further, potentially unconstitutional. You know, the Constitution in Article 1 plainly gives to the Congress the power of the purse. And for the president to try to circumvent Congress in order to obtain funding for a project which Congress has declined, where Congress has declined to do so, absolutely undermines the entire system of checks and balances on which our democracy is based.
I want to thank you for helping us out, and you've done a marvelous job of explaining this whole very complicated process. We appreciate it. We'll get you back again down the road, and you can help to educate us some more as we move around through these constitutional battles. Andrew, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You take care.